Harry has been dramatically shut out of FIFA World Cup. Not simply uninvited in boring admin terms of missing from official guest list though. Shut out by a specific documented reason, with one famous person's name clearly attached to it all.
Prince Harry, a man who would have been expected before his move stateside to be one of the faces of the FIFA World Cup being held in the United States of America, has been shut out. And we're hearing it's in large part because of his personal feud with footballing legend David Beckham.
David Beckham. The difference between uninvited and shut out actually matters. Uninvited feels like missing from list, passive outcome only. Shut out suggests an active dynamic where someone's presence is deliberately not wanted because of who is there and what it signals in context today. That is exactly the picture emerging from reporting this week around Harry and the World Cup final story. The detail making it genuinely significant is not the actual snub itself. Individual events are declined all the time for all sorts of reasons, and not everyone gets invited to everything anyway. But what the specific framing of the snub reveals about the settled shift in Harry's commercial and social status over the past 5 years, and specifically about the judgment that major global events are now making about whose presence enhances them and whose presence does not. Tonight we are diving into the World Cup story. What it says about how far the Beckham-Sussex relationship has traveled since the 2018 wedding where David and Victoria sat in the front row as honored guests, the specific incident in Australia that reportedly ended whatever goodwill survived the accusation, and then a story that has been building quietly for 5 years: The Bench, the children's book that was supposed to launch Meghan as an author, whose 5-year anniversary this week has produced a moment of reckoning about what that commercial failure was actually telling us at the time about everything that was to follow. Let's start with the World Cup because the reporting is specific and the detail matters.
Meghan Markle.
Yes, my favorite.
A force for good, or?
Well, I think a force for a perpetual balance. Perpetual.
Are you happy to have her back in the United States?
We are not. We'd love to do a trade.
The FIFA World Cup is now staged in the United States. Harry is based in the United States. On any normal assessment of where he was 5 years ago, the global profile, the American base, the celebrity network, the prior history of appearing at major international sporting events alongside royalty, athletes, and entertainment figures, he would have been a natural presence at a tournament of this scale being held on his doorstep. A few years ago, the assumption would have been that he would be at the heart of it. Front row, celebrity appearances, the kind of presence that generates its own coverage. The way he was at the heart of the London 2012 Olympics when the Sussex story was still in its early popular phase. He is not. Rob Shooter's reporting is direct about why David Beckham Harry has not been invited to the FIFA World Cup final.
Prince Harry has not been invited to the FIFA World Cup final. And insiders tell Naughty But Nice the reason is simple: David Beckham. The soccer icon is expected to be one of the biggest stars at the event, while Harry won't be there at all.
David Beckham is expected to be one of the biggest names there at event. And insiders say the decision is not a simple guest list or logistics issue but a cold, settled judgment about whose presence the tournament actually welcomes and what those presences now signal publicly. Football already picked its prince years ago, and it is David Beckham. That framing of football picking its prince is worth sitting with because it is not just rivalry or a simple social snub between former friends anymore now. It is a status assessment made by a global stage event about which presence enhances it and which presence complicates it in real time. Such judgments, once made at the level of major international events, usually tend to be durable. They reflect public accumulated perception. Who this person is, what their presence communicates, and what it does to the event around them, not just one moment's judgment. That is exactly why the World Cup story matters as an indicator of trajectory rather than just another social tale about a friendship that ended badly now.
The snub carries extra sting because Harry and Meghan Markle were once close friends with David and Victoria Beckham. That relationship unravelled after the Sussexes allegedly accused the Beckhams of leaking stories to the British press. David never forgave it, says a source. The accusation destroyed the trust. Once that happened, there was no coming back.
Gossip sources quoted in reports claim the relationship was already completely destroyed before the World Cup judgment was even made anyway. It is said current exclusion is not about present conduct but fallout of a breach that happened years ago and was never repaired, allegedly. Still, The accusation that David Beckham and Victoria Beckham were leaking stories to British press made by the Sussex operation toward people they had trusted as close friends is described as the exact moment of destruction. David never forgave it. The accusation destroyed the trust. Once that happened, there was no coming back. If the Palace Debrief is giving you the full picture on this kind of story, the specific detail, the 5-year retrospective, the structural breakdown, rather than just the headline, the like button costs nothing and it keeps this channel alive and reaching people who want this analysis right now.
David Beckham went all the way to Australia, and Harry said that he'd got no time to see him, he doesn't want to see him, he's too busy. So there was Harry sort of getting ready to be with a football match, a very important one, and he was left very rudely for David Beckham. And I think, he is the king of football and all the rest of it.
David Beckham is expected to be one of the biggest names at the event, and insiders frame the decision not as a boring logistics or guest list issue, but as a settled judgment about whose presence the tournament actually welcomes and what those names now represent on a global stage. Football picked its prince years ago, and that prince is David Beckham. And that line, "football picked its prince," is exactly the kind of framing worth pausing on, because it is not just about a petty rivalry or a celebrity snub between old friends anymore. It is a full-on status verdict from a global event about who enhances its image and who complicates it. These kinds of judgments, once made at the level of major international tournaments, tend to stick. They are built on long-term public perception, not one-off moments. Who someone is seen as, what their presence signals, and how it changes the tone of the event around them matters more than anything else. That is why this World Cup story is being read less as gossip and more as a snapshot of shifting trajectories. The reporting sources claim the relationship was already effectively destroyed before this World Cup situation even came up. In that reading, the exclusion is not about current behavior at all, but the aftermath of a breach that happened years ago and was never repaired. The accusation that David and Victoria Beckham were leaking stories to the British press, allegedly made by the Sussex operation toward people they once considered close friends, is described as the exact breaking point. David, according to these accounts, never moved past it. Once trust broke, there was no recovery. That was the end of it. And if the Palace Debrief is delivering the deeper layer of this story, the 5-year rewind, the structural breakdown instead of surface headlines, the like button is the simplest way to keep this analysis going and reaching people who actually want this kind of breakdown. The No Show in Australia said, "And I don't think this relationship is worth the effort to resolve it." Since then, the Beckhams have moved into Williams' orbit in a way that is visible, consistent, and has generated its own steady stream of positive coverage. David has publicly supported Williams' charitable and sporting initiative. Catherine wears Victoria Beckham's designs regularly and in high-profile settings, giving Victoria's label the kind of royal adjacency that luxury fashion brands actively value. That alignment is out in the open, which also means the shift away from the Sussex world and toward the Wales world is now visible to anyone watching both relationships develop in opposite directions over time. And now the World Cup has delivered the most high-profile snapshot of where that realignment has landed. Beckham positioned as one of the defining faces of the biggest sporting event in the world, while Harry is not present in that frame at all. Subscribe to the Palace Debrief so you never miss what comes next, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Was the Beckham accusation ever grounded in anything solid, or was it a major misread of where the real briefings were actually coming from, one that ultimately cost Harry one of his most recognizable remaining friendships? Now, the story shifts to the bench, because this week marks 5 years since Meghan's children's book released, and the retrospective analysis of its performance says more about the broader Sussex commercial trajectory than most coverage ever admit. The bench came out on June 8, 2021, in what should have been close to an ideal commercial window for a major publisher launching a book tied to one of the most talked-about public figures in the world. COVID restrictions were easing, consumer spending patterns were shifting, and there was a renewed habit of book buying. Meghan was also at peak post-Oprah attention after the March 2021 interview that triggered the biggest royal controversy in years, with Harry and Meghan dominating headlines across the UK and US media cycle. The book was backed by Penguin Random House, a publishing powerhouse, under a reported $40 million deal covering 4 books across Harry and Meghan. Yet the bench sold only 3,212 copies in its first week in the UK and failed to enter the official top 50 charts, despite launching at a moment of maximum visibility and attention. For a release in that context, those numbers stand out sharply and are difficult to frame as a commercial win under even generous interpretation. The book presented itself as an exploration of the father and son bond through a mother's perspective. But that concept immediately ran into a widely discussed contradiction. Meghan's own relationship with her father, Thomas Markle, had already become a public and widely reported estrangement, including his absence from her wedding and his ongoing media interviews. That contrast between theme and lived public reality shaped how readers received it, even before engaging with the content itself. In hindsight, the 5-year view reveals something bigger than a single disappointing first-week performance. It shows the structure of a broader commercial arc under the $40 million deal. The bench is one part of that deal, Spare is another, and together they sit within a wider question about how long the original royal departure story could sustain commercial momentum once the initial moment had passed. Spare was a genuine commercial success, selling millions of copies worldwide on the specific promise of institutional revelation. Secrets from inside the palace, accusations about named family members, a royal perspective on a royal rupture that readers had been following for years. The advance for the books was substantially justified by what Spare generated. 2 books down, 2 remaining, and then silence. No publication date, no announced manuscript, no title, no clear indication that the remaining 2 books under the deal are even in active development. The Daily Mail's analysis suggests the deal has quietly moved into an inactive phase, with the remaining books never materializing. Penguin Random House, like Netflix and Spotify before it, has effectively moved on without renewing at the original scale. There were reports of a joint Harry and Meghan wellness book that never appeared, and talk of Meghan developing her own memoir. A Vanity Fair piece even described a manuscript reportedly being prepared in case of a future Sussex separation, a post-divorce book drafted before any actual divorce exists. That detail matters less for what it says about the marriage itself, and more for what it suggests about the commercial logic behind the operation. Building a manuscript around a potential future event points to a strategy built on anticipated drama rather than present-day independent value. In other words, the business appears to be structured around what might happen next rather than what is compelling on its own right now. What the 5-year bench anniversary really exposes is the shape of the broader commercial arc. Early deals with Netflix, Spotify, and Penguin Random House were all struck on the strength of a single narrative. A royal couple leaving the most famous institution in the world and ready to explain it through global commercial storytelling. That was a genuinely powerful, high-demand story, and the companies paid accordingly. But stories have life cycles. The highest urgency is always at the beginning. The numbers over time reflect that shift clearly. The 2022 Netflix documentary about the royal fallout delivered 81.6 million viewing hours in its first week. By contrast, the 2025 cooking show, detached from the royal conflict and focused on domestic California life, generated around 5 million total views and ranked 383rd globally in the first half of 2025, below older catalog content and even children's programming. The difference is simple: crisis versus calm. And crisis-based storytelling has an expiry date determined not by output, but by distance from the original event. The bench became the first clear example of that limitation. It underperformed because audiences were primarily invested in Meghan as part of a royal rupture story, not as a standalone children's author. When the central hook is the controversy itself, adjacent projects don't automatically inherit that attention. Across 5 years, that pattern repeats. Initial massive deals built on the royal exit narrative, followed by diminishing returns as that narrative ages. Contracts are not renewed at the same level because the original premise cannot be recreated indefinitely, and no fully independent commercial engine has replaced it. The bench sold 3,212 copies in its first week in 2021. 5 years later, the wider business structure built on that same foundation shows fragmented partnerships, reduced deals, and stalled projects. In hindsight, the bench wasn't just an underperforming book. It was an early signal of how quickly narrative-driven commercial momentum can fade once the original story stops being new. Before we close, there's one more story from this week that offers a sharp contrast worth noting, because it says something about what genuine longevity in public interest actually looks like versus the commercial version of that same longevity. Letters and cards exchanged between Princess Diana and the late British actor Terence Stamp have gone to auction this week. The correspondence, dating back to 1991, reflects a friendship that feels easy, natural, and unforced in a way that comes through in every line. Lunch plans, champagne, and even casual references to Prozac. Diana herself writes with characteristic irreverence, "3 cheers for Prozac, not the American variety," she adds almost as a throwaway joke. Alongside that are playful postcards that show a very different side of her, far from the formal public image she was constantly required to maintain. One includes a bare female breast with the caption, "All the breast from London." Another jokes about why God invented sex, with the punchline hidden inside the card itself. What emerges is a version of Diana that audiences rarely saw in real time. Relaxed, witty, slightly chaotic, and completely unguarded with someone she trusted. What makes these letters resonate isn't just their content, but their tone. They feel like a person speaking without performance, without institutional pressure, without the constant awareness of being watched. That only happens when trust is absolute, when the recipient isn't just a contact but a safe space. And the real point of contrast is what Terence Stamp did with them. He kept them. For 30 years. Through Diana's death, through global fascination with her memory, through documentaries, biographies, and constant commercial interest in anything connected to her life. He never sold them. He never leaked them. He never turned them into an interview or a story. He simply held on to them as private correspondence. Only after his death did his estate eventually decide to release them for auction. That distinction matters. Diana, like anyone in her position, trusted many people, but the ones she trusted most were those who understood that proximity to someone famous doesn't automatically grant ownership of their private world. It is trust, not content. Something to protect, not monetize. Terence Stamp, according to this framing, understood that for decades. And that's where the contrast becomes unavoidable. Because it raises a broader question about how relationships function when fame, access, and commercial opportunity sit in the middle of them. Some people preserve what they're given. Others convert it. And the difference between those two approaches says everything about how trust survives, or doesn't, in a world built on attention. So the question this story leaves behind is simple. What does the Beckham situation suggest about how friendships were evaluated when they became inconvenient? And does the 5-year view of the bench and the wider post-royal commercial arc point to execution problems that better management could fix, or something more fundamental about the gap between what audiences wanted from the story and what was actually being offered once the original moment passed? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to the Palace Debrief so you don't miss what comes next. And as always, the like button is what keeps this analysis going. Until next time, the story is still unfolding, and so are the consequences.